Hello. Today I'm doing another behind-the-scenes session, which is me reading uninterrupted or unedited, let's say, and I make no warranties about the quality of this particular video, except that I think that it's interesting and that there is some material in here that I think some of my friends should hear. And so I'm reading today from, don't need that. I'm reading today from Liberating the Heart by I'm reading today from Liberating the Heart, Spirituality and Jungian Psychology by Dr. Lawrence Jaffe. I'm reading from chapter 7 called Jung and Mechanistic Science. There are two quotes at the beginning of the chapter. That is the great problem before us today. Reason alone no longer suffices. C.G. Jung, The Undiscovered Self. Every human character occurs only once in the whole history of human beings. Isaac Bashevis Singer, Love and Exile. So I thought about putting a thumbnail on this video, which is Alfred E. Newman from the Mad Magazine history, but I haven't done it because I haven't found a good image of Alfred E. Newman that I could use. But some of us my age will remember Why Be Normal? And you'll see why Dr. Jung was against normality. In his last years, Jung was preoccupied with the subjects of synchronicity and the incarnation of God in man. Both these ideas if you're not hearing me, please let me know. I'll start again. In his last years, Jung was preoccupied with the subjects of synchronicity and the incarnation of God in man. Both these ideas have the effect of liberating us from the oppressive and devaluing grip of causality, 19th century science, and materialism. These inform us that we are victims of circumstance and of negligible importance in ourselves. Science, though it is only a tool, has for the last 200 years functioned as a god, a supreme value, exacting, as all gods do, worship in its service. Now we are at the point of emerging from an unconscious and conscious subservience to a science, Now we are at the point of emerging from an unconscious and conscious subservience to a science inclined to statistical formulations, thereby nullifying the essential quality of uniqueness in each individual. Admittedly, science, even in its primary mechanistic manifestation, stands as a bastion of reason in the time of disorientation. Yet we must be wary of a science whose materialistic, positivistic bias has come to stand for the denial of the grandeur of the individual. Jung writes, quote, "Man is not complete when he lives in a world of statistical truth. He must live in a world where the whole of man, his entire history, is the concern, and that is not merely scientific, and that is not merely statistics. It is the expression of what man really is and what he feels himself to be. The scientist is always looking for an average. Our natural science makes everything an average, reduces everything to an average. Yet the truth is that the carriers of life are individuals, not average numbers. When everything is statistical, all individual qualities are wiped out, and that, of course, is quite unbecoming. In fact, it is unhygienic, because if you wipe out the mythology of a man, his entire historical sequence, he becomes a statistical average, a number. That is, he becomes nothing." And this is why Dr. Jung used to always say, "Bring me a normal man and I will fix him for you." And also why Alfred E. Newman, "Why Be Normal," is relevant here. Individuation versus normality. Patient after patient speaks to me of the frustration in not being able to be normal. What a relief to recognize that normality is a statistical concept with no empirical validity. What a relief to realize emotionally, as well as cognitively, completely and unconditionally, that there's no such thing, really. There's no such thing as being normal. But what a long road it is that leads finally to that realization. Science may assert that the average or normal stone in a riverbed is of a certain circumference, say 4 inches. But, as Jung pointed out, you could search and search and never find a stone in that riverbed exactly that size. Normality is an abstraction derived from the study of statistics. It doesn't exist in reality. A patient of mine experienced a profound sense of relief just on hearing Jung's wise and cogent words that for some people their deepest need is really to be able to lead. Their deepest need is to be able to lead abnormal lives. That's a quote from Problems of Modern Psychotherapy, The Practice of Psychotherapy, Collected Works 16, paragraph 161. Stones don't try to deform themselves into desirable proportions, but sensitive human beings afflicted by mechanistic science are often possessed by the uncontrollable desire to be what they call normal, by which they generally mean just like everyone else. They forget they were meant to be something unprecedented, that what they were meant to be is a mystery that only they, with the help of God, can realize by living their life, including the error inherent in it. With the sincerity and devotion that Christ lived his. Not that one's life need be a model of beauty or perfection. As Jung writes, a complete life does not consist in a theoretical completeness, but in the fact that one accepts without reservation the particular fatal tissue in which one finds oneself embedded, and that one tries to make sense of it or to create a cosmos from the chaotic mess into which one is born." Unquote. That's from Letters, Volume 2, page 171. Joseph Wheelwright, the charismatic co-founder of the Jung Institute of San Francisco, defines individuation as becoming what we have it in us to become. He does not like to speak of becoming whole because, as he explains in his inimitable fashion, quote, "Whole suggests that it's something just around the corner on 3rd Street, and when we get there, why then we'll be like a new shiny Ford that's come off the conveyor belt. And I don't think that ever happens." Unquote. One's life may resemble more the twisted little apples that Sherwood Anderson describes. In the fall, quote, "In the fall, one walks in the orchards and the ground is hard with frost underfoot. The apples have been taken from the trees by the pickers. They have been put in barrels and shipped to the cities, where they will be eaten in apartments that are filled with books, magazines, furniture, and people. On the trees are only a few gnarled apples that the pickers have rejected. One nibbles at them, and they are delicious. Into a special round place on the side of the apple has been gathered all of its sweetness. One runs from tree to tree over the frosted ground, picking the gnarled, twisted apples and filling his pockets with them. Only the few know the sweetness of the twisted apples." Apparently, this is from a book entitled Winesburg, Ohio, by Sherwood Anderson. I quoted from him before, but I didn't know what it was. I quoted it from him before, but I didn't know what it was. So now it appears to be a book, and this quote came from page 36. In similar vein, Jung writes of the lordly beauty. In a similar vein, Jung writes of the lordly beauty and the divine completeness of an individual old oak tree, or the unique grotesqueness of a cactus. He continues, quote, "Science is only concerned with the average idea of an oak or a horse or man, but not with their uniqueness. From the standpoint of science, the individual is negligible or a mere curiosity. From the subjective standpoint, however, i.e., from the standpoint of the individual himself, the individual is all-important, as he is the carrier of life, and his development and fulfillment are of paramount significance. It is vital for each living being to become its own entelecheia. Entelecheia, I've defined it in the description of this video. It is vital for each living being to become its own entelecheia, and to grow into that which it was from the very beginning. This very vital and indispensable need of each living being means very little or nothing from a statistical standpoint. means very little or nothing from a statistical standpoint, and nobody outside can be seriously interested in the fact that Mr. X is to become a good businessman or that Mrs. Y is to get 6 children. The individuated human being is just ordinary and therefore almost invisible. He will be all right. He will be all right if he can fulfill himself as he was from the beginning. He will have no need to be exaggerated, hypocritical, neurotic, or any other nuisance. He will be a modest harmony with nature. He will be in modest harmony with nature. Now, the point here is that every creature, every being, take an oak tree. An oak tree is an oak tree, but every oak tree is different. And oak trees know how to become themselves. So do human beings, except we overthink it and would think we have to be average. We do not. How is this accomplished? To live in modest harmony with nature, to individuate. The answer is that there are as many paths to this goal as human beings upon the earth, but for each particular human being, only one path. It is an inner path which the person must follow. In one's outer life, 1,000 misfortunes may occur. One may choose the wrong mate, never parent a child, or become a parent when one was never intended to be one. Become a parent when one was never intended to be one. Choose the wrong vocation, or none at all. Far from being a barrier to individuation, these detours are a necessary ingredient of it. There would be no, I'm sorry, my vision is bugging me, so I'm going to have to hold the book a little closer. Far from being a barrier to individuation, these detours are a necessary ingredient of it. There would be no such thing as individuation if there were not roadblocks and detours, just as there would be no such thing as a path were there no wilderness around it. In fact, it is their presence which makes individuation possible, as in the medieval labyrinths, whose cul-de-sacs forced the wayfarer to traverse every inch of the labyrinth and experience every possible wrong turning before admission was granted to the central mystery. The path to the goal is an inner path and remains invincible before the vicissitudes of outer events. Only death extinguishes hope of progress in this life. So how do we discover our own inner path to find out who we were meant to be? To this question, there is no general answer. The singularity of each of our paths is part of what makes finding it and staying on it so difficult. We have no company and very few guidelines. A story is told of the Knights of the Round Table, that when loathly damsel broke in upon their merrymaking and set them upon the quest for the Holy Grail, the knights thought it a disgrace to embark upon their journey as a group. Therefore, each sought an entrance into the dark forest, which none had entered before. But can no advice be offered on how to find one's unique inner and outer path? I will offer some, but first a caution. Advice that is generally valid can be poison in a particular case. For instance, the biblical injunction already referred to To do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with God is good general advice, but poison to a person too identified with conventional norms of goodness and morality. Say a woman is too identified with her husband and family. She may interpret those words to mean she should continue to suppress parts of herself opposed to her role of good wife and mother, parts of herself that must also be permitted to live. For her, the Zen sage's advice would be healthier. If you meet your father going down the street, kill your father. If you meet your mother going down the street, kill your mother. If you meet the Buddha going down the street, kill the Buddha. This means that nothing is so important as your individuation, and you must root out attitudes that you took on as a child, unaware, and you must root out attitudes that you took on as a child, unaware, which do not belong to your essential nature. Or as Christ said, quote, "Do not think that I come to bring peace on earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes will be those of his own household." Matthew 10:34-36. And again, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple." Luke 14:26-27. Christ says he has come not to bring peace, but a sword, meaning that if you follow the path of individuation first trodden by Christ, your life will not be peaceful. It will be filled with inner turmoil, because you will have to use the sword of discrimination to distinguish, for instance, what belongs to you in a relationship and what belongs to your partner. Or you will have to cut through habitual, peaceful ways of being in order to reveal whether those ways of functioning belong authentically to you or, say, to your parents. Or you may have to question conventional standards, for example, the supremacy of the mother-wife role for a woman. Nothing is so important to carry your own cross, says Christ. That means the same as finding and following the path of individuation, which has been prepared for you from eternity. This is the most difficult path, but paradoxically also the easiest, because the only one which will allow you to die with the knowledge that you lived out your life through and through. I'm going to reread that. Hello to those of you who have joined me. Hi, Miles. Nice to see you. Hello, Jeffrey. Glad you can all hear me. And Miles says he ended up in the exact career and company that he visioned in grade 7. Then 25 years in, that company determined that it was not for me. Well, things change. So there's a need to take new routes of individuation, not remain in a rut. Absolutely. Yes, we must question the icons and paradigms that are being venerated. Absolutely. All right, so I'm going to reread that sentence. This is the most difficult, but paradoxically also the easiest, because the only one which will allow you to die with the knowledge that you lived out your life through and through. The generally valid truths offered by religions no longer seem to work so well without reinterpretation, which is the reason for books such as this and for psychotherapists. What collective truths then can be trusted? I will offer some, but bear in mind that they may not apply in your case. I will offer some, but bear in mind that they may not apply to you in your case. Remember that God wants to incarnate in you. You may think that it is you who desires growth, change, or individuation, but the impulse to discover the place in the world which, for good or ill, one is intended to fulfill according to one's nature, comes from something much greater than your ego, namely the self, or God. Another way to say it is that your desire to become who you were destined to be is a powerful instinct which you must find a way to serve. As the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas says, quote, "If you bring forth what is in you, what you bring forth will save you. What you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. You must give expression to what is most truly yourself. For instance, you may need to write or paint or work in the garden or sail or play tennis or change your profession or love someone even if it makes a fool of you. If you do not discover who you are and give expression to it, this may undermine your health. Cancer, for instance, can result when there is an insurmountable obstacle to individuation, as apparently happened in the case of Jung's father, a minister who died at the age of 52 because he could not reconcile his faith with science. The reference to the Gospel of Thomas is footnoted as number 70 in the Nag Hammadi Library, page 126. One could say that Jung spent his life in an attempt to accomplish the task which defeated his father. Now, how can you serve the individual? Now, how can you serve the individuation process, which really means how can you serve God? Because becoming yourself is serving God. Do generally valid precepts exist? Now, how can you serve the individual? Take a Sabbath, a time of rest, once a week, even if only for 15 minutes. Protect this Sabbath from the claims of work, children, spouse, parents, and friends. When you enter your free and protected space for those minutes, try to be open to what comes to you. You can think of it as meditation if you want, or perhaps you will feel the urge to write or paint or draw or dance or think or be sad or be angry or be in nature. Regularity in taking your Sabbath is essential. However, so body and soul will come to anticipate it and depend upon it. I'm going to reread that sentence. Regularity in taking your Sabbath is essential, however, so body and soul will come to anticipate it and depend upon it. Now there's another subsection called Self-Knowledge gives meaning. Self-knowledge gives meaning to life. There's a quote from Dr. Jung's Ion, paragraph 318. Christ is the inner man who is reached by the path of self-knowledge. Reading the book. Reading the biblical narrative of Christ's passion and coming upon the words, knowing everything that was going to happen to him, quote, unquote. John 18:4, I wondered, why make a point that Jesus knows what will happen to him? I thought of how knowledge was being emphasized here and how with my patients I emphasize awareness. I often have to assure them that it is through increased awareness that 90% of the task of psychotherapy is accomplished. And he identifies the task of psychotherapy as psychic transformation. So I'll read that sentence once again. I often have to assure them that it is through increased awareness that 90% of the task of psychotherapy, that is, psychic transformation, is accomplished. I can trace back my lifelong obsession with improving myself to my 10th year, and it probably goes farther back than that. Evidently, I have felt inadequate for a long time. Why? The conclusion I have arrived at is that for a child of religious temperament to be born in America in the middle of the 20th century must have been a dreadful shock. As my school books were fond of proclaiming, we were living in the industrial age. We should be grateful for our high standard of living. We were the arsenal of democracy, or else the breadbasket of the Western world. History, geography, social studies were celebrations of materiality and reinforced, rather than counterbalanced with the marketplace values of the world outside of the classroom. Truly, there seemed no place for the spirit. I thought, too, of how I rejected knowledge as a youth and even into middle age. I realized only lately that I was right to reject the type of knowledge purveyed in schools in the middle of the 20th century. As Jung pointed out, under the impact of the French Enlightenment, the spirit has been degraded into mere intellect. But a knowledge that tells us what is to come is a different order of knowledge. Jesus reassures us that the Holy Spirit will make known the things to come. This was the sort of knowledge I was interested in. But what was taught in schools in my youth concerned itself only with the behavior of physical entities. I dare say my teachers considered it to be pure, untainted by metaphysical influence, but for me it was devoid of meaning. In the last 200 years, we have learned the extent to which we are like machines and like animals. Now it is time to learn we are also like gods. Okay, I'm going to stop with this reading at that point. I probably will continue on with this paragraph another time, but I thought I would at least get this one out there. I just want to check here. Okay, I've been going for 34 minutes, so I'm going to cut this short. I'll take a quick question or comment if there is one. And Miles says, yes, we must question the icons and paradigms that are being venerated. And he also says, it seems to me a lot of people are satisfied for a long time with living on the surface. Someone defined religion as being what we tend to. Some don't tend to the deeper thoughts. Well, that's certainly true, but we also, the point of this passage is that we don't tend to ourselves. And the point is that every other creature, including plants, knows how to become itself. Okay, each and every creature becomes a unique individual, whether it's a plant or an animal. And it doesn't need society to tell it how to become itself. It just does it. And what Dr. Jung's point is, and Dr. Jaffe's point is that individuation is about becoming yourself. It's not about becoming an American or a Japanese or a Canadian or a Bulgarian or whatever it is. It's not about that at all. It's about becoming what you are. And the only way that you can find out what you are supposed to be is by examining yourself inside yourself, not by examining what other people are doing. And this is why Dr. Jung used to joke, as I said earlier, bring me a normal man and I will fix him for you. I always like that quote. Miles says, yes, self being deeper than just the material. Definitely true. Okay, so are there any other questions? I'll give you another 10-15 seconds to put on a question. Otherwise, I'm going to go and have my Friday dinner, and then I will edit this video for future use. This is only a behind-the-scenes online session just to give access to Miles and a few others. And we do have a few people watching. And for example, yesterday we had an Answer to Job session, which ultimately had about 28 people who attended in all or part. But since then, I think the number is up to 92 people have watched the video. So I'm happy to do these as a way to get ideas out, although they're rough cut. Louis Oscar says, thanks, I just caught the end. Okay, well, Louis Oscar, I'm going to cut off now, and this will come on as on a different URL as a video in a few minutes. I'll make sure that happens before I go to dinner, as long as YouTube allows me to do that. And if YouTube doesn't allow me to do that, I will do it right after I come back from my Friday dinner. So peace. I'll talk to you soon. Our next scheduled session is Monday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. Thank you for watching.